So today we'll be discussing a flow that we go through all the time. We sign up, we log in. After that, we make get requests, post requests, patch requests, put requests, and then we get logged out again. So what enables this flow is session authentication, and we're going to see how that happens in this video. First, let's start off with sign up. So when you do a sign up, you normally share data like the email, name, password, and once you type that in, you press enter. Let's try to simulate that flow over here by making a post request with that data. I have this sort of a setup where the client side, let's say you have a browser, and the backend is a Node.js server that's running on my local, and that is connected to a MySQL database. So now after I created, and when I hit this API with a sign up, it created a user in the users table. Before it was empty. Now we will have one user. It added its name, email, password, and other data as well, which we will get into. This is the sign up route which was hit. The email, password, name came through as part of the request body. We took it, we hashed the password because we don't want to store the password as it is, and once it's inserted into the DB, we sent back a response saying the user was added successfully. So before we do a login, a quick explanation of how these requests work. Each request that you make, whether that be requesting getting some data or making a post request, asking for some data, filling any kind of a form, each of those are standalone separate requests. So each of them, when it hits the server needs to verify whether this request is valid, or whoever is making this request, can he see that data or can he change a certain piece of data. So you can keep that in mind. That's how requests are made. They are standalone requests. Now coming back to the login flow, I'm adding my email, my password, and I'm trying to log in. So let's hit the API that I have, and it says logged in successfully, and we have a cookie. So going back to the code, what's happening is when I log in, I give my email password. I took it from the request body, and then I searched in my database where that user is. Once I have that user, I need to confirm whether the password that he typed in is right or wrong. So I took it back, rehashed the password, compare the hashes, and if everything looks good, now you know that the user has logged in successfully. Now comes the role of session IDs. So once the login is successful, the server will generate a session ID. It can be a random ID, which is the case here, and I'm going to update the table, and I'm going to set the session ID as part of one of the columns. So if you look at the code now, there is a session ID which is added for this particular user, and I'm also going to send this session ID back as part of the cookie. So the client is going to get back this cookie as part of the response, and the client, which would be the browser in this case, browser will handle the cookie, and it would keep sending it in the future requests. So if you saw in Postman as well, what we did now, we got back a cookie, which is the session ID, and I can use this session ID as part of future requests. Now that the clients have the cookie, for future requests, they're going to be sending it to the server. So let's look at a get request, a plain get request. When I send this request, I'm going to send the session ID that I have gotten as part of the cookie, and I hit send. So it was able to detect which user this cookie belonged to, and it's giving me personalized information for that specific user through the help of the cookie. In the code, let's see what happened at that get request, we took the cookie which was passed as part of the request now, and then we need to validate that session. So when you validate the session, same thing, you just take the session ID that was passed, search for it in the table, and then you know which user that session belongs to. And once we have that confirmation that that session is valid, you have the user's information, and then you can use it to send back data which is specific to that user. Now looking at how this is stored in the current setup, I've put session ID as a column within the users table. But what if there are multiple sessions? You log in from a different device. So normally what we do, we create a new table which is specific for session related data, and you're going to have the mapping with the user ID. So that will hold session specific data like the session IDs, the expiry time as well for that session can be set. So this gives you that level of flexibility. For example, if you set an expiry time, each time you search for that session, you can also look at its expiry time, and if that has expired, you can set the session ID back to null, and then you can redirect them back to the login page. Also, if you look at banking applications, instead of just an expiry time, they test activity. So each time you hit the API, it checks if the session is valid, and you can also update another column which is basically the last activity, and you can set a certain time period. So if there is no activity in the last 5 minutes, then you can consider that as an expired session just by setting the session ID back to nil, and the user would be redirected back to the login page. As long as there is a valid session ID, the user will remain logged in, and it's as easy as just setting the session ID back to nil to make the user logged out, and all the other requests, all the get requests, post requests that are coming in, each of those requests will always validate the session ID, and if that session ID is not present, and if it's it expired, then we just keep setting it as nil and the user is logged out. So for all these requests, we will always need to refer back to the database to check if the session is valid. But one of the advantages of having session authentication is the ease at which you can nullify the sessions. As we saw, you just set the session ID as null. You have that level of flexibility, but you will still have to always hit the DB and keep checking if that session ID is valid. So that's it for session authentication, and I will see you later.